Hi, everyone. This is Justin Murphy with the Democrat and Chronicle. I'm here with my colleague Steve Orr, and we'll be talking about the Daniel Prude case today. It's hard to believe that it's been less than 2 weeks since we first found out about this case publicly, because so much has happened since then. A flurry of press conferences and releases last week, and then another really important one yesterday, where we finally got some answers, but not all the answers to the questions that we've been asking in terms of who knew what when. The city released 325 pages of documents related to its investigation of Mr. Prude's death, as well as a brief preliminary report by the deputy mayor outlining his findings from that. The mayor also promised a series of next steps. She fired Chief Singletary and put the Corporation Counsel and Communications Director on unpaid leave. And she did not take any questions, so we have not had an opportunity to ask them those. So Steve, I will ask them to you instead. On your first perusal of the documents that we got yesterday, what were some of the key things that jumped out at you?
I guess the biggest takeaway from different parts of the documents is that it really does seem, or at least the documents make it appear, that folks in RPD from the chief on down were actively doing what they could to keep this word of this from becoming public. There's a considerable amount of information in the documents related to the body-worn camera video that was shot by the many officers who responded to the scene where Daniel Prude was restrained and injured in such a way that it led to his death. And almost immediately, within a week of his death, a lawyer for the family filed an open records request with the city, demanding that they release the video and paper records of the incident. That video was not released for more than 4 months. And the documents, some of them released yesterday, document what was going on behind the scenes that caused that long delay. And clearly RPD from the get-go, within a day or two of that FOIL being filed by the lawyer, was attempting to persuade the city's lawyers to not release it, providing arguments to them that were of arguable legal value. And that they persisted in their attempts to persuade the city lawyers not to release the thing for a couple more months. The city law department as well contrived to find excuses to not release it to the lawyer. There are various machinations, quasi-legal ones, arguments they made. In the end, they agreed to release it, but then still took 2 more months to actually do so. And this is documented pretty well, and it answers some of the, one of the questions we had is why in the world it took so long for them to give the video to the family and their lawyers.
Yeah, this is, as frequent filers of open records requests with the city, we suspect these kinds of conversations are going on all the time in terms of thinking of ways not to provide information that rightfully belongs to the public. Right off the bat, at their very first press conference, the mayor and now former Chief Singletary adamant in saying this is not a cover-up. We know that it took a long time. We know that everybody's angry. It's not a cover-up. And this report certainly does not prove that it was not a cover-up. There still can be some question about that, and certainly there's more fact-finding to be done. But it's actually at kind of a couple levels, because it seems like what the mayor is trying to carve out as a position is that there was a sub cover-up of some kind with RPD and possibly with her own top cabinet members, Corporation Counsel and Communications, that for whatever reason they declined to share with her the full scope of what had happened. And I think the document that has jumped out to a lot of people in this big file is an email from Chief Singletary to Justin Roy, the now suspended communications director, where and it comes on the day, I think it's April 10th, that the medical examiner's report comes back with a ruling of a homicide. And that is the first documented communication we get between the police department and the mayor's direct team. He says, FYI, here's what happened. And he lays out an account that's not entirely accurate and is clearly sugarcoating in some areas. But he says at the end of it, the mayor has been in the loop, legal has been in the loop, and I'm just waiting for a call back from the mayor to tell her about the medical examiner's report. So that, I think, as we think of our follow-up reporting and the questions that we need to get answered, that jumps right off the top. What does it mean for the chief to have said the mayor is in the loop? What does it mean? Did he call her and say, Miss Mayor, I need to tell you about the medical examiner's report? And did she make the decision not to call him back, or why didn't he email her? I think that, that's the main thing that we've been trying to get at all the time, that probably, frankly, will determine her political future, whether she stays in office or not, is whether she can provide a satisfactory answer to that question.
Well, I believe the mayor said, as indicated anyway, that that to the extent she knew anything about Mr. Prude's death, she had been led to believe that it somehow was a drug-induced, a drug overdose, something like that. It's conceivable there was a conversation between the mayor and the now former chief back in March or early April, as the chief claimed there was about to be. But then the question is, what did he tell her? Did he somehow cause her to believe that it was a drug overdose? Or did she hear it that way because that was a more satisfactory way for her to hear it? Or was there no conversation at all? We just don't know. I mean, there's an effort in here by the deputy mayor to go through. He went through apparently a huge volume of email looking for any communication to the mayor or to others at City Hall that was explicit about what had happened to Mr. Prude, and says that he didn't find it. But of course, there's no way for him to go back and document conversations on the phone or in person. And as he points out, there were dozens of times when the mayor and the chief were together. And of course, he could have called her at any time as well. So we still don't have any clue as to what if anything, the mayor was told. This whole thing about drug overdose, which has come up, or somehow drug induced, the documents that were released, make it clear to me anyway, the way I read them, is that for the most part, it's not that you don't get the impression that the police who were investigating what had happened conclude that that's what it was. I mean, they were treating it as an investigation into a death of somebody who was in custody of the police. And they don't emphasize drug overdose or anything like that in the investigative materials. The chief, when he communicated with Justin Roy, did focus on that a little more. And he interpreted the medical examiner's report, perhaps incorrectly, to suggest that drugs did play a role in his death, which ultimately they did not, as far as we can tell, at least directly. So if the mayor really formed this impression that it was somehow a drug-related death, how that would have happened remains really a mystery.
Yeah, and it's not a secret that people in the executive branch will often have a studious avoidance of written communication. James Smith, the deputy mayor, rightfully notes that there were 50 times at least that the mayor and the chief were in the same room together or spoke together in that timeline over the summer. And at their last joint press conference, I asked both the mayor and the chief directly, are you saying that at no point between April 1st, right after Daniel Prude died, until August 4th, when the mayor says she first saw the video. At no point did either of the two of you say the words Daniel Prude to each other, or did the chief not to the mayor? The mayor said, "Not that I recall," and the chief said, "I'm not going to get into my private conversations with the mayor." So that response is distinct. No, he obviously at this point doesn't have much to protect in terms of his relationship with the mayor or his professional career with the police department. So that is something that certainly is going to bear more fruit. This report from the deputy mayor did not include any interviews or anything. And we should, I think, briefly go over, Steve, the incredible number of investigations, some of them with subpoena power, that are ongoing. For so long, we had nothing happening at all in public at that time. And by now, I'd say investigators are going to be having a hard time finding a hotel room in Rochester.
Yeah, I mean, it is true. There are calls for, I believe, 3 separate inquiries by the Justice Department, Federal Justice Department. One from 2 Democratic politicians who are upset, who want the Justice Department to look into the police handling of protests. One yesterday by the mayor to look into civil rights abuse, potential civil rights abuses, and one from the lawyers for the family who essentially want the Justice Department to appoint somebody to oversee reforms in the police department. On top of that, there's the Attorney General investigating. There's City Council planning to investigate. Who have I forgotten, Justin? I think there's at least one other.
The Office of Public Integrity, which reports to the mayor at the city, but is something. I think, one conclusion that James Smith drew that I think we can all agree on and have known from the beginning was that there was an incredible deficit of empathy on the part of the officers, not only on the night of March 23rd, but afterward. There's one email in here from Frank Umbrino, a high ranker in the police department, summarizing the case and saying that Daniel Prude had been shipped to Rochester by his family because he was having drug problems and he was wigging out and acting crazy. And like, as we have been discussing, not even just recently, but especially recently, the need for mental health training and services and possibly shifting away from a police-driven model. It's an incredibly striking indictment of the way that those cases are viewed, even after they knew that this guy had died or was soon to die. In an email among the highest ranking staff at the police department, they're using these really derogatory and dismissive terms about his mental health situation.
And there was also this series of documents released yesterday in which one of the supervisors who was involved in looking into what had happened and overseeing investigators that were conducting a criminal investigation was attempting to get the officers who responded to the scene and wrote their reports about what happened to change those reports to indicate that that Daniel Prude was a criminal suspect. And it said, in big letters, in big red letters, somebody wrote, "We suspect this sergeant in question, make him a suspect," on the officer's report. Meaning it's a kind of a convoluted thing, but there were 2 incidents that night that drew police attention, or that morning rather. One was a broken window at a store on West Main Street. And then a few minutes later was their encounter of Mr. Prude on Jefferson Avenue nearby. The broken window, excuse me, was in fact a criminal act. It was later attributed to Prude, although he was never charged with it. He was never charged with a crime that night. He was taken into custody under the mental hygiene law so that he could receive, ultimately was to be taken to the hospital to receive help. But the report, they wanted the report it's one officer or one sergeant anyway, apparently wanted the report changed to make him listed as a suspect, not a victim. So that, and some other changes as well were requested in the report that really makes it seem as if they were trying to paint Mr. Prude in a bad light, to make it, I guess the theory being that it would be less of an affront that they had to restrain him and ultimately suffocate him if he was in fact a criminal suspect. That, the idea being that, well, he fought back, he was trying to get away, he deserved to be restrained because he was a bad guy. I mean, that's, as we're assuming, was the thought process. We don't know that, but there really were some striking changes that were requested in the reports, which seems, in retrospect, to be.
Yeah, the same sergeant noted in his memo that Prude had a lengthy arrest history in Chicago, which of course is not germane to anything that happened to him naked on the street in Rochester in March.
Exactly.
So Steve listed the number of active investigations there are. Of course, there's also the Democrat and Chronicle investigation. We don't have subpoena power, but we like to pretend that we do. We have summarized a lot of what we've talked about here in a story that's on our website now. That's for subscribers, and we hope if you don't subscribe yet, you'll consider supporting the work that we're doing. And any further questions about Daniel Prude case, we hope will contact either Steve or me or one of our colleagues, and we'll be dedicating a lot of energy to this over the next few months and possibly longer. Thank you for today for
Thank you.